Welcome to this episode. In this episode, we are going to be talking about larval feeding and rearing. In the previous episode, we talked about egg incubation. We are going to see how the larvae looks like after we have incubated. In our setup, the eggs take around 3 days to hatch into first instars, which are very small for a naked eye to see, but people with good eyes can see. Is what I have in this tray. After the eggs have hatched and we have given time for the young larvae to move into the substrate, we normally remove the egg collection devices. BSF larvae or black soldier fly larvae are afraid of light. So when they hatch, they will tend to move to the bottom of our rearing container, which contains feed, hence get into the substrate and start feeding. After we have incubated the eggs, we give it a period of between 1 week to 2 weeks for everything to get into the substrate and start feeding, and then we get rid of our egg collection devices so that we can expose the diet into the sunlight, give enough space for the larvae to move around and feed. The first feed takes around 10 days until it is exhausted. Normally, when the feed is fresh, it's light brown in color, but as the larvae continue feeding, it tends to turn dark when it is exhausted. They tend to burrow, leaving the frass or their waste on top. So when the diet is completely dark, it's now time to introduce new feed for the larvae to continue feeding. So we'll need an empty container to scoop the frass on top. This is done lightly for young larvae and is done to give more space for the new substrate that we want to introduce. Then we check the population in the tray. If it is high, we need to share out the larvae into different trays. The first time it normally goes into 2 trays, and like this every time we feed. My tray has more than what can survive in it without competition, so I'll need to share the larvae in the tray into 2 portions. When we are feeding, the substrate is introduced at the bottom because I said the larvae are afraid of light, so they normally tend to burrow down there and feed at the bottom. So we share this into half, and this is good to go. And we also need to give it the same details the previous tray had, because it's the same batch of eggs. So we will need a label that looks exactly like this, the egg collection date and the hatch date, to fix on our new container. And then from there, it goes back to the rack to continue feeding and growing. So this is done once per week, but one can decide to do a one-time feeding where you have your quantity of substrate weight around 7 kg. You spread it on your feeding container and then weigh your larvae around 10 ml or 10 grams. You pour on the feed. Those are 5-day instar larvae, and you are good to go. That feed is enough to let the larvae grow to the 5th instar that is needed for protein. When they have attained this stage, we let the substrate dry by stopping to feed, and then from there it proceeds to harvesting. We need to have a stable colony throughout. That is, we need to have all the stages at every given moment. We need eggs, we need young larvae, we need the 5th instars for harvesting, and we need prepupa that will then proceed to pupation stage, which goes back to our larvae cages there and emerge into adults and give us flies. So part of the trays that reach 5th instar, we let them proceed to the 6th instar, which is this dark stage you see here. And this is the stage that turns into pupa after 14 days. And pupa is like what I have in this container. They are dark in color and then they are dormant. They look like they are dead, but they are not dead. And this is what is taken to the cages there to give us adults that will now start the new cycle of egg harvesting. The time taken for the BSF larvae to reach the harvesting stage depends on how rich the feeding substrate is in protein. Substrates that have high protein content in them, BSF larvae develops very fast, from between 3 weeks to 1 month. When they reach the 5th instar, which is the stage that I'm holding, you need to stop feeding so that the substrate can dry, and then we start harvesting from there. So we scoop bit by bit, then we use a sieve like the one that I mentioned on the other side, and then place them on a mesh in case there was any pupae that was in the harvesting stage will be left on the mesh, and all the moving stages will go down the mesh, and we end up with a clean product like this. Why we place our harvest on the mesh is to get rid of any remnant of the feed, and also to get rid of the pupa stage. The pupa stage has less crude protein that we are looking for as compared to the 5th instar, which has around 42 to 57% of crude protein. And this is the stage that the farmers are looking for as an alternative protein source. Once all the larvae drop into the container, this is when we kill them, and then we proceed to drying. That marks the end of this episode of larval feeding and larval rearing, which now brings the new episode about larval harvesting, processing, and storage. Look out for the next episode, and remember to subscribe.